The Honest Truth with Benito Vergatini. Smile 90.4 FM.
Worldwide spending on information security and risk management technology and services is forecast to grow 12.4% this year, according to the latest forecast from Gartner Incorporated Security. Joining us in conversation, Chief Executive Officer at GoldPhish, Dan Thornton. Mr. Thornton, good evening and thank you so much for your time.
Hi, good evening. Thank you very much for having me.
Absolute pleasure. So it was fairly recent when U.S. President Joe Biden had urged companies to tighten their cybersecurity just in response to events unfolding in Europe. Dan, how is Russia and the Ukraine affecting global cybersecurity industry?
It's a funny one. We haven't really seen, a major attacks like we would have expected from Russia on the cyber front. But despite that, full-blown cyber warfare could definitely still be on the horizon. The U.S. government has been providing warnings to their U.S. companies now for threats posed by Russian state hackers since actually long before the Ukraine crisis kicked off last month. So, Russian cyber forces carry quite a punch. With capabilities proven over several high-profile attacks in recent years, all linked back to Russia. So there's definitely a capability there. Threats to the wider industry, threats to businesses sort of outside of Ukraine, definitely still exist. Russia, we really shouldn't be underestimating their willingness to use cyber to go after Ukraine. And those countries providing arms to Ukraine and implementing sanctions against Ukraine, or against Russia, sorry. So cyber retaliations definitely give Russia a means to exact costs without crossing any major red line. So definitely an ace up their sleeve that we could expect to see as this conflict continues.
Yeah, I do recall some of those earlier reports which you referred to where U.S. intelligence pointed out around the Russian cyber attacks, and this days before the invasion. So clearly there's a need for governments to play a role in beefing up their cyber security. Would it be around accelerating legislation?
It's definitely something that, the industry would like to see. And, governments are getting more and more impacted by cyber attacks every year now. We've seen in the U.S. large municipalities being taken offline and critical services being taken offline. That's having a huge impact on society and on the voters, really. So governments, really need to increase resilience across their countries. And every country is looking at ways to do this. This was done very effectively for protecting data, and legislation that came out to do that with the likes of GDPR, and in South Africa we brought up the POPI Act. So it's only a matter of time, I think, before legislation is introduced to require a certain level, a basic level of cyber hygiene across businesses in order to stay compliant.
Do you think, Dan, that South Africa's legislation is effective, or in terms of POPI, it's still too early to tell?
I think it's still too early to tell. I mean, a lot of countries, even with the strength of the GDPR legislation that we've seen across Europe, it's been very difficult for them to implement. We're dealing now with legislation and laws that are still written, in a way that don't take into account, the cross-border, the international sort of nature of online business and the technical revolution that we've experienced over the last 2 years. So, moving data around cross borders is very difficult and very complicated. So it's quite tough to really implement this legislation and crack down on it and make sure that it's properly followed. But we're getting there. Having the legislation in place is definitely a great step in the right direction, and hopefully we can move in the same direction with cybersecurity controls.
Yeah, you make a very good point, because there's an argument from that observation, Dan, that there needs to possibly be some sort of global agreement around this, whether that's possible in terms of an overarching legislation that impacts upon the globe.
Yeah, I agree, and it's definitely a nice concept. But, any legislation, especially against your largest corporates, you've got the cybersecurity industry, and maybe Joe Blogs in the street would love to see more cybersecurity around the companies that are holding their data or are looking after their business critical services. But then those large players in the technical industry, the last thing they want is legislation, because it's more cost, it's more difficulty, and it's more hoops and red tape for them to deal with. And so I think we're always going to see pushback from the sector, the tech industry and large business around legislation, because it does make life very difficult for them.
How do business owners then better protect their business with this cybercrime continuing to rise?
Businesses worldwide, within all sectors and all sizes, they have to start taking this increased cyber threat very seriously. We've seen, as you've mentioned, an increase year on year in the number of successful attacks, in the amount of losses that businesses are experiencing due to cybercrime. So they have to do everything possible to protect themselves. Really, and looking at the employee, every user, at every level in every business needs to start getting a little bit more cyber savvy, as we like to say. Security is no longer just an IT problem. It's not a problem for the IT department solely anymore. Each employee, they've got a critical role to play in adhering to the company policies, if the company has any, trying to identify and avoiding any potential threats that they may encounter as employees, and then reporting those problems, reporting their suspicions to the security teams. Security awareness training it's essential for developing this workforce capability, and it's an absolute critical control for growing secure cultures and helping businesses stay safe online.
And it seems practical to do that, because the research indicates that 90% of cybersecurity breaches are caused by human error. So well within a business interest to ensure that the workforce is certainly not only cyber savvy, as you point out, Dan, but cyber resilient.
Most definitely. It is, the human element of cybersecurity is huge. We can have great policies, great controls, great technical systems in place, but if one employee is not behaving the way that they should, if one employee opens the wrong email, opens the wrong attachment, visits the wrong website, it can all go horribly wrong very quickly for a business.
Yeah, it certainly can. From a business perspective, how does one then minimize potential damages and ensure that there are those necessary protocols in place? Does it start, in fact, by having a policy around cybercrime?
Most definitely. Businesses, of all sizes need to develop cybersecurity policies and allocate the resources to effectively implement them. That can be through an in-house information security team if the organization is large enough, or your smaller organizations can outsource that type of service to trusted managed security service providers. But they have to find the resources to do so. They have to start taking security seriously and start having those policies in place. Secondly, they need to prepare for the inevitable. Every business will at some point in time experience a cyber attack. It's inevitable. And they need to have sound cyber incident response plans in place to ensure that, that they can handle it when it happens and they can recover as quick as possible. And then finally, a bit of advice for really all businesses out there. Cyber insurance is playing a big role now in cyber risk management. The insurance coverage that businesses of all sizes now can obtain will greatly assist them in navigating an attack when one happens, as well as recovering the financial losses from an attack and the recovery costs resulting from one as well. So, just three top tips there for businesses.
Do you think it's worthwhile, as well, as much as there are fire drills periodically, that there are cyber attack drills? Do you think that could be effective?
Definitely. We in the industry, they'll run phishing simulations against the employees. So, the employees can actually experience what a phishing attack would be like. They can actually measure how employees will act against the phishing simulation and act against the phishing attack and test their vulnerability against that. But then cybersecurity teams, your technical cybersecurity teams, they definitely want to be running regular drills as well. And you can have exercises and drills on that sort of more advanced technical level where the security team can practice how to identify threats in their networks. They can identify how to come up with solutions to stop an attack, to limit its spread. And, all of that is essential to preparing for the day that it does happen.
Just from an observational point of view, Dan, I mean, we recognize the seriousness that cybercrime presents potentially for businesses. Is it at this stage, is the awareness up there, or is it still fairly academic at this stage from a South African user point of view?
I'd say from a South African point of view, the enterprise size organizations, your big businesses out there that have got the resources to do it, are taking this quite seriously, especially those that are handling particularly sensitive data that they wouldn't want to lose. Your financial institutes, the healthcare services, these are industries taking it very seriously, and throwing the kitchen sink at it to make sure that they've got the resilience in place that they need. A big gap that we're seeing really now is in the small and medium-sized space. And these businesses, they don't have the resources to be able to recover properly from a big cyber attack. A ransomware attack against a small business could cripple it, that they never open their doors again. And so, something we definitely want to start seeing in South Africa is the small and medium-sized enterprises starting to take this a little bit more seriously, starting to find the budget to allocate to this, whether they outsource it to a managed security service provider or whether they try and do it themselves. It's a priority now that they need to take as a very serious business risk.
And lastly, following on from that, we acknowledging World Backup Day this week. It's Thursday the 31st. What can individuals, what can entities, particularly those that you refer to, the small and medium enterprises, do to ensure that they are cyber savvy?
Yeah, so great points. This Thursday we've got the World Backup Day, and when we refer to backups in the cyberspace, we're talking about backing up data. It's one of the most critical controls in place to help any business or any individual survive a ransomware attack. The way that these attacks take place is they will completely lock you out of your devices. They'll lock out all of your data. They could, we're seeing malware these days that is completely wiping data and destroying data completely. So, anytime that happens, if you don't have that data backed up and that data is not in a secure location, if it's not offline, it's not backed up correctly, you'll lose access to all of that. And that can be devastating to individuals with all of their personal information, photos, family data and information that they need. But it can be absolutely devastating for businesses as well, who may never recover from losing that critical data. So backing up is one of the most vital controls that we try and teach our customers and learners.
Dan, where can our listeners find out further information?
You can visit us at www.goldphish.com, and Goldfish is spelled with a THISH. We provide online security awareness training to businesses trying to educate their employees and keep them cyber savvy.
Dan Thornton, Chief Executive Officer at GoldPhish. Find out more, reach out, goldphish.com. Dan, appreciate your advice and insight. Thank you so much for sharing it with our listeners this evening.
No problem. Thank you so much for having me.